Good evening and welcome to the Border Zone Project. Today we discuss different issues in regard with bilateral relations between Georgia and the United States. And our guest is Deputy Chief of Mission of the United States to Georgia, Ms. Elizabet Rud. Hello.
Hello, how are you doing, Егор?
Fine, thanks a lot. And how are you doing in this difficult period? As I know, you spent a few weeks in quarantine. How was it?
Well, that's true. I'm fine, and I have not been ill at all. I was in the United States from the last day of February through the first couple of weeks of March, and it was during that time that the epidemic truly began to spread. So when I came back to Georgia, the quarantine requirement was in effect, and I spent 2 weeks at home in self-quarantine, working from home, and enjoying some extra time with my dog, Lucy.
Yeah, and the whole period of this quarantine and COVID pandemic in Georgia, how do you see it for you especially? Like, was it tough or was it maybe a bit better than in some other countries?
Of course, it's not easy to have restrictions, and we must not underestimate the very great difficulties that the restrictions that were necessary to handle the pandemic have caused for the business community and the society more broadly. It's going to take a long time to recover fully from the economic effects of the pandemic, not only in Georgia but everywhere. But I would say that the situation in Georgia has been handled very well, and that puts Georgia in a position to be a country in the earlier in the stages of recovery than many.
Hopefully. I was going to start this interview with some other topic that we will discuss a few minutes later, but like news and fake news flow dictates its rules. So my first question to you will be, do you personally or your friends and colleagues, Americans in Georgia, work in Lugara lab? And why do you develop a biological weapon there, as Russian foreign ministry states all the time?
Well, I certainly do not work in the Lugara Center myself, but I'm glad you asked me about it, because in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have noticed an increase in fake news and disinformation about the Lugara Center, which is very unfortunate, because anytime there is fake news, it has the potential to cause societal harm. And when there is fake news, disinformation about an important public health facility, then that undermines the ability of public health authorities to deliver an effective response in the case of an infectious disease. So it's important that people know the truth about the Lugara Center and what it really is. The Lugara Center is the home to the Georgian National Centers for Disease Control, and it also houses the U.S. Army Medical Research Directorate, Georgia, which is part of the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. And although it was established with United States funds of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency in 2006 and became fully operational in 2013, the Lugara Center is now fully owned and operated by the Georgian government. And as I said, it houses the Georgian Public Health Authority, the Georgian National Center for Disease Control. The Lugara Center was established precisely to respond to the kind of infectious disease outbreaks that we see now with the COVID-19 pandemic. And it has provided the Georgian government capacities for state-of-the-art testing for COVID-19, as well as ongoing capabilities for disease monitoring, coordination, communication to the public about public health, and coordination among the different parts of the Georgian government. So Georgia has been very fortunate to have this facility already in place in times of a global pandemic.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I would just repeat maybe once again, we showed Lugara Lab, Lugara Center many times in our episodes. And for our audiences to understand it better, Lugara Lab is controlled by the National Disease Control Center, directed by Mr. Gamkralidze and Mr. Pate Imnadze. And these people in Georgia, they're heroes who made the situation be what we have, what we see now, as positive as it could be. So it's very important from my point of view to highlight it once again. Could you please tell me, I don't understand, each 6 months, I don't know, 3 months, we hear about biological weapon. Why?
Well, because one of the tactics of those who are propagating this kind of disinformation is to create fear. And what can be more frightening than the idea of biological weapons being produced? But I have to say again, this is not true. It is fake news. It's not news at all. It is false propaganda. And the only reason that I can suggest to you why we are seeing it now is that those who are propagating this kind of propaganda are seizing an opportunity, a time when people in fact are frightened because of a disease, and they're using this opportunity to try to increase that fear, to try to create distrust, mistrust between population and the government, and to try to undermine trust and cooperation among countries that should be working together to fight this global pandemic.
Thanks a lot. I think it's clear enough. It should be clear enough. Could you please tell me, continuing this issue, would you say that democratic societies failed to counter the spread of the virus when dictatorships succeeded and did much better in prevention of COVID-19 spread?
Well, I would not say it's true that autocratic governments are showing more effective responses. They may have the ability to make command decisions very quickly, but in fact, I'll say first, no country is immune to a global pandemic, and germs, bacteria, and viruses know no borders. So a global pandemic requires a global response. But what we see is that democracies are best positioned to provide an effective public health response, because in a democracy, people are more likely to trust the government, to trust the public health officials, because the people have chosen their leaders in a democratic process. And democratic governments are more responsive to the needs of the people. And because democratic governments are governments that share information with the people that is factual and that is reliable, because they do not have a need to lie to their populations or deceive them. So again, global pandemics require responses at the local level, the national level, and the international level. They require cooperation, they require honesty, they require transparency, and these are the very things that democratic governments are best designed, best capable of providing, because transparency, honesty, openness are the things that are the foundation of democratic values. And when the information that governments provide is truthful, that means it's not the kind of disinformation that undermines the trust of the people and contributes to fear, but it's information that enables citizens to play a constructive role in cooperating with public health authorities and into becoming a part of the response, a part of the solution to public health threats.
Thank you. Would you say that at the moment, some people say that democratic communities, United States first, of course, cannot solve inner problems, so they ask how can they help some other countries or their allies. So what I'm interested in, did United States provide any assistance to Georgia during this pandemic, during this last few months? What was the assistance, and which spheres of, I don't know, public health, security was targeted?
I would say, again, that the Georgian government was able to respond very effectively to the COVID-19 pandemic and to respond quickly. And I would attribute that to a number of factors. One factor is that decades of US support for Georgia has helped Georgia to build a public healthcare system that is capable of meeting the needs of the Georgian people. The second factor is, as I mentioned before, the presence of the Lugar Center here in Georgia gave Georgia the capacity to provide state-of-the-art testing for the COVID-19 virus, provide diagnosis right from the very, very beginning, when other countries were still struggling to find that basic testing capability. And third, I would say because Georgia has very much developed as a democracy, this is a country where the Georgian people did trust the government and did trust the public health authorities and did cooperate with the things that needed to be done as a society to manage the pandemic, to cooperate with social distancing, to cooperate with the curfews, with the limitations on gatherings. And because they cooperated, Georgia is now in a position where it's able to ease those restrictions and make the first steps toward a resumption of normal life, even though we have to remain vigilant. Now, in terms of United States assistance specifically for the COVID-19 pandemic, we have provided a great deal. We have provided personal protective equipment for medical personnel and other workers and officials who are in the front line. In addition to the testing capacity already present at the Lugar Center, we have provided 4,000 additional gold standard polymerase chain reaction test kits that were developed by the International Atomic Energy Agency with US funding. We have provided technical assistance through our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that have assisted with tracking, diagnosis, epidemiology, contact tracing, and so forth in the value of $3 million. The U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, has provided another $2.7 million in new COVID-19 related assistance that has helped in many ways. For example, in providing accurate public health information, in reaching the remote regions, in reaching ethnic minority regions with correct information, in helping civil society to contribute to the response, and in helping to communicate that disease should not be a reason for discrimination against any ethnic group or class of citizen. We also expedited the delivery of 27,000 tons of very high quality American wheat, which is going onto the Georgian market, and the sale of that wheat first provides a needed commodity here in Georgia, but it also will be used, the proceeds of the sales will be used to increase the productivity of the beef and the dairy sector here at a time when that is very much going to be needed. And then finally, I'll say that we are planning to stand by Georgia and provide significant assistance to help with the economic recovery, in addition to the longstanding support that USAID is already providing for a sustainable economic growth and prosperity.
That's really a lot, I believe. Yes, very good. And could you please tell me, I saw some statements of the embassy during this pandemic, when all of these measures took place. We saw unending process on Georgian occupation lines, where new wave of borderization took place and taking place at the moment. What is the position of the embassy in this regard? And do the embassy have any kind of cooperation with Georgian authorities in this regard?
Well, let me first reassert the United States' unwavering, enduring commitment to Georgia's sovereignty and its territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. And repeat again, our call for the Russian Federation to fulfill its obligations under the 2008 ceasefire agreement to withdraw its forces to pre-conflict positions, to renounce its recognition of the Abkhazia and South Ossetia territories as so-called independent states, and to allow humanitarian access, which is so badly needed now, to those very regions. We have watched with great concern the process of so-called borderization, the erection of barriers and other forms of obstacles along the administrative boundary lines to restrict freedom of movement of Georgian citizens on either side of the boundary line. And unfortunately, it does appear that there has been an increase in this activity precisely during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, precisely when all actors, all parties should be doing everything possible to reduce tensions so that we can all focus on protecting the health of the populations wherever they are. And yes, the United States is always in close contact with our partners in the Georgian government about the situation. And we, of course, participate and support Georgia's territorial integrity through the Geneva International discussions, which is the only existing forum for international dialogue about the unresolved issues arising from the conflicts in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Of course, given the restrictions in travel and other limitations that have been brought about on a global scale because of the pandemic, there's a pause in the next round of the Geneva International discussions, but we expect in due course they will resume, and that is where we will also continue through diplomatic channels to support Georgia.
Do you believe such kind of channels are effective in these kind of formats?
Well, unfortunately, I have to say we have had many rounds of the Geneva International discussions and have not yet solved the major problems and have not yet restored Georgia's territorial integrity. However, it is also very important that there be a forum for discussion, that there be mechanisms, including the Geneva International discussions, including the IPRM's incident prevention and response mechanism on the ground, and the hotline, which serves to help prevent tensions on the ground from escalating into something worse, including the presence of the European Union monitoring mission, which contributes a very important role to the stability in the region. Are these mechanisms effective? Well, they serve a purpose. And it's very important that they continue until such time as the larger goal of restoration of Georgia's territorial integrity is reached.
We hear all the time that all activities of the United States in Georgia are some kind connected with Russia and relations between United States and Russia. Now, during this pandemic, we hear that United States cannot help, they have their own problems, but you just mentioned lots of different kind of support provided to Georgia. What I'm interested in is this support, including Lugara Lab and others, are some kind of tool between in regard with US-Russia relations, or why United States keep doing it even when your country experiences its own problems? Why do you keep supporting and helping to Georgia?
The United States considers Georgia a very important strategic partner, but not because we look at Georgia through the lens of Russia. We look at Georgia as our strategic partner because, yes, it is in a very important geographic location, but more importantly, because we share core values with the Georgian people. We share a love for democracy and freedom, and we want to support Georgia on its path of becoming part of the community of Euro-Atlantic democratic nations. And we remain very committed to Georgia in this way. And that is the purpose of our support to Georgia. And we consider Georgia our steadfast partner as well in shared, the accomplishment of shared goals on the international stage. That is why, for example, we attach such great value and appreciate so deeply the sacrifices of Georgian soldiers over many years, shoulder by shoulder with American and NATO forces in the Resolute Support Mission in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and peacekeeping missions in Kosovo before that. Georgia is a very important partner despite its small size, and we remain deeply committed to our relationship.
You just mentioned the NATO training, and of course I cannot ask about whether these kind of trainings and relations in military sphere between Georgia and the United States are targeted against Russia again.
No, we have various forms of military security cooperation with Georgia that have been going on for many years. I mentioned the Resolute Support Mission in Afghanistan, and we have an ongoing and long-standing program, the Georgia Deployment Program, through which we assist in the preparation of each Georgian battalion that deploys to Afghanistan, and we deploy together with them, and that is contributing to international security cooperation and stability on a scale beyond this immediate region. We also have security cooperation aimed at strengthening Georgia's ability to contribute to countering global threats, such as the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction or items that could be used to create weapons of mass destruction, to help Georgia interdict narcotics and other forms of contraband at its maritime borders and at its land borders, to help Georgia respond to global threats such as human trafficking, trafficking in persons. These are all the kinds of things that require Georgia to have communication capability and high level of interoperability with NATO and allied and partner forces that operate in this larger region. We have a more recent program with Georgia called the Georgia Defense Readiness Program. It started in 2018, and that is helping Georgian battalions, the Georgian Defense Force battalions, train and prepare for territorial defense, and that is intended to enhance Georgia's ability for its armed forces to also carry out their core mission of defending Georgia as well from any external threats.
So could you please just tell me whether Georgia is a reliable partner for the United States in the region, because we hear lots of different kind of information in regard with polls, opinions, and propaganda as well. Do you see United States State Department see Georgia as a reliable partner, and what are the major programs of the United States here, strategic, not short-term but long-term?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the United States considers Georgia a reliable partner. That's why I call Georgia our strategic partner in this region. Again, it is a partnership that's rooted in shared values, including democracy. Now, our long-term goals in Georgia, in terms of both our diplomacy and our assistance, are aimed at Georgia's sustainable economic growth and prosperity, its democratic development and ability to provide services to its people, and to its ability to secure its own borders and contribute to international security. I would say that a long-term goal we are focused on right now has to do with Georgia's democratic development. There have been some difficult developments in Georgia over the past 12 months that the United States has expressed concern about here and in Washington. But I can say that we are going to continue to stand by our Georgian partners to help in the conduct of free and fair elections, to support the ongoing process of electoral reforms that will help ensure even more clean and fair elections in the future, and to increase an environment of political pluralism in Georgia, and to assist Georgia in, as I mentioned before, overcoming the economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic through support to the agricultural sector, to support to small and medium enterprises, in support to economic empowerment of vulnerable populations, the economic empowerment of women, the economic development and creation of jobs for communities living in vulnerable areas, such as along the administrative boundary lines with the occupied territories and minority regions. And I think it's also important to note, since we started by talking about public health, that we're not just responding to COVID-19, but we're continuing our long-term and more strategically oriented public health assistance. Georgia, as I mentioned, has developed a public health care system that can take care of the needs of the people. And we have now a more sophisticated partnership that's elevating Georgia to operate at a higher public health level. For example, through USAID, we are helping to create a pediatric cancer center where children in Georgia will be able to receive world-class cancer treatment right here instead of having to go outside of the country for it. Also through USAID, we're working with our Georgian partners to explore new treatments for tuberculosis. We are providing technical support to the Ministry of Health and Parliament's Committee on Health and Social Affairs to enable them to do their jobs more effectively. Through the centers, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, we are implementing a program for the elimination of hepatitis C, which has Georgia on track to become possibly the first country in the world to eliminate that terrible disease. And we also have ongoing programs to strengthen Georgia as a country that is able to detect on a regional and a global basis and prevent both animal and human diseases through networks of labs to prevent and detect and manage any future outbreak of infectious disease like the one we're facing now.
I think it's very important what you just said, and even I didn't know about some programs, and I'm sure that lots of people have no information about it. And what was really important for me is like this program in regard with people who live on administration borders or occupation lines, because they really suffer every day. Thanks a lot for this interview. It was really interesting, and I'm just very disappointed that we didn't find those people working in their Lugara lab on biological weapon during this talk, but maybe we will keep on searching, and someday, I don't know, we'll see.
You will not find that which does not exist.
That is my big problem, because I visited Lugara lab I don't know how many times, and I was like, I hope that you maybe will say that I work there, I do this, but you didn't.
I visited it myself and seen for myself what happens there, and I can assure you and all of your listeners and viewers that there is nothing to fear. In fact, we should all be grateful that the Lugara Center was here for us to help manage this pandemic and keep everyone safe.
That's the fact, and once again, thanks a lot to Mr. Pate Nadze and Georgian Center for Disease Control. They did a great job.
Absolutely, they did. They are truly heroes of our time.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.